Okay, I wanted to briefly talk about the recent Venezuelan election in which Nicolas Maduro, the effectively dictator of the country, was re-elected by a margin of about 10 or 20 percentage points. The world over, people can clearly see that this election was corrupt, and I'm going to use the word rigged. Nicolas Maduro has tremendous power over the country, and he is tremendously unpopular because his policies have taken Venezuela, one of the most rich countries in terms of natural resources, and continuing with the socialist policies of his predecessors, Venezuela is a failed state at this point, with potentially hundreds of thousands of people fleeing the country, many of them winding up here in the United States. This all just goes to show that you can vote your way into socialism, but you cannot vote your way out. Socialists do not believe in playing fair when it comes to elections or anything else. It is a fundamental aspect of their ideology that because the members of the party, of the Socialist Party, know what's best for wealth redistribution, for the way you should live your life, because they're so smart and they know these things, they can't possibly be voted out of power. So when they become unpopular, they have to do these things. They have to rig the election system. They have to jail and silence their political opponents. This is not something that is unique to socialism, but it is nearly ubiquitous within socialism. So that is the current state of Venezuela right now, and they're seeing an incredible outrage on the part of the populace. They're very unhappy about these results. We're seeing riots in the streets, socialist statues of socialist figures being torn down by protesters. It is very dramatic what's going on over there, and I will keep you guys posted about that. I wanted to talk real quick about the current Democrat nominee for president, Kamala Harris. We don't know if they'll keep her around as nominee because they pulled the switcheroo already with Joe Biden, but for now we'll assume that she is the nominee. Over the past 2 weeks or so since she's been the nominee, it's shocking how recent that's been. But the media has been giving her a tremendous gift, really an in-kind contribution, by attempting to hide her record and her stances on a variety of issues on which she is a complete radical. They know that if people saw her positions on these issues rather than the very showy and very platitudinous kind of political ads that Kamala Harris has been putting out, if they saw the real Kamala Harris, people would be disgusted by how radical she is on a wide variety of issues. So first off, I want to talk about healthcare. Kamala Harris, during the 2019 presidential election cycle, came out in favor of abolishing private health insurance, basically nationalizing it, or in other words, socializing it. Kamala Harris is just a sort of toned down version of Bernie Sanders on economics. She is in fact a socialist, whether she admits it or not. She wouldn't admit any such thing, but it's true. Moving on to the issue of abortion, I said while Joe Biden was still the candidate that Donald Trump was by far the more moderate candidate on this issue, and that has remained the case with Kamala Harris. She believes in abortion all the way up to birth. For all we know, she believes in abortion after birth, such as the law in Virginia from Governor, I believe it was Ralph Northam, who said that if a baby was born during a failed abortion procedure, then they would take the baby into another room and have a conversation with the mother about whether or not to kill it. I have no doubt in my mind that at least from a moral perspective, Kamala Harris is totally okay with that kind of behavior, even if she wouldn't admit it for fear of losing votes. Additionally, she is, again, on the topic of economics, she's radical on identity politics and racial wealth redistribution. Kamala Harris came out in support of reparations for Black Americans during that 2019 presidential election cycle. So what she supports is taking money away from presumably white people who were never slave owners and giving it to Black people who were never slaves in this country. She did not clarify how such a thing would be implemented. Of course, it is completely impossible to implement such a thing on, even in theory, a fair basis if you are only going to take money from the ancestors of slaveholders or people who directly benefited from slavery and give it to people who are whose ancestors were slaves or who were directly detrimented by slavery. Completely impractical. Okay, most people are descended both from slave owners and slaves. Myself, I probably am descended from both because there is some African blood in me and also a lot of European blood. So, chances are descended from both, just like Obama. So he and I are similar in that way. But regardless, on that and many other issues, Kamala Harris is a total radical, and you have to be informed of this, and you have to make sure that everybody else is informed, not just about, oh, Kamala Harris has Megan Thee Stallion and Jack Black and all these celebrities on her side. That is an attempt to basically misdirect away from the issues and just turn this presidential election into a popularity contest, basically. But what we want to do here on this channel is make sure people are informed so that they can make the decision that they believe is the correct decision at Election Day. What's up, guys? I wanted to go over quickly the recent hostage deal that the Biden administration negotiated and executed. This hostage deal included several prisoners swapped between the United States and Russia and involved several other countries as well. Some of the people that the United States got back are Paul Whelan. He's a Marine who's arrested in Russia on specious charges, and the journalist Evan Gershkovich, who similarly was detained on, I believe, espionage charges. Who Russia got back were basically spies, criminals, and terrorists, and killers as well. For example, one of the people who was returned to Russia had assassinated a Russian dissident in another country as well. A couple of them were major hackers. So these are the kind of people that Russia got back. I think it's great that Americans are coming home, especially a United States Marine. But with that good news, we cannot ignore the cost, and that is that all these criminals and terrorists will be returned to Russia, where presumably they will resume their former activities. And that is something that could potentially threaten the national security of the United States, as well as other countries. And additionally, one of the problems with making deals like this is that when Russia sees that all it needs to do to get back its terrorists and criminals and hackers and spies is to wrongfully imprison a few Americans, then, I mean, that's quite easy for them to do. Russia is a very corrupt country. So if there's an American on vacation there, they can simply detain them, falsify charges, and hold them until the United States caves and decides to release some arms dealer such as in the case of Brittany Griner, the WNBA player, who was exchanged for a man who's known as the Merchant of Death, who is a weapons seller. So, while it is great that some Americans are coming home, unfortunately, this deal does put America in a weaker geopolitical position, and to some extent, I believe this deal will threaten our national security as well as the security of Americans living abroad, because it shows to unfriendly nations of the world that America is open to bargaining over hostages. That kind of activity ends up incentivizing these unfriendly nations to take hostages. So at the end of the day, this is a very nuanced deal with some positives and negatives, and we'll see how this situation turns out. All right, so I want to talk about the recent controversy surrounding Kyle Rittenhouse and who he is going to be voting for this November. So if you're not familiar with who Kyle Rittenhouse is, he was a resident of Kenosha, Wisconsin, who was protecting a car dealership during the 2020 Black Lives Matter riots. He ended up being in altercations with several of the rioters there, and he shot 3 of them. One of them, the man was trying to bash his skull in with a skateboard. That was caught on camera when that man was shot. Additionally, another man at one point tried to attack him and reach for his gun, and he shot that man as well. And the third man had pulled a gun on Kyle and was walking towards him with that gun and was shot in the arm. So the first 2 men died of their injuries, and the third man was only injured. And so this was a very dramatic and widely publicized trial. The media made up incredibly dramatic lies about him, trying to make Kyle out as a racist and accusing him of murder. But ultimately, the verdict came back not guilty, so Kyle was able to walk free. And since then, he has been a Second Amendment advocate. He's been somewhat relevant in right-wing circles in politics. And recently, he uploaded a video to Twitter saying, in effect, that he was unimpressed by President Donald Trump's record on the Second Amendment, and that because of that, he would be writing in Ron Paul's name in this election. Now, as a result of this, you might say MAGA, a lot of Trump supporters on Twitter ended up piling on Kyle, saying that he was being hypocritical since Trump had supported him when his trial was going on, and now he was not supporting Trump. Some people even went so far as to say that they wished that the verdict had come back guilty in his trial. I too criticized Kyle. I thought that where Trump had been supportive of him during his trial, that as a result of that, he ought to support Trump now. And also, I pointed out that if Kyle were to write in Ron Paul's name, that would be one less vote for Trump, which would only help Kamala Harris, who is in favor of gun confiscation. But after a few hours, Kyle released a statement saying that he had been speaking with members of the Trump campaign, and that he had changed his mind and that he would be 100% behind Donald Trump this November. I think it's good that he ultimately decided to support Trump, but it was unfortunate kind of the way it came about. A lot of people were being very unfair and cruel to him on Twitter, if I'm being honest, and I probably went at him a little harder than I should have. I think it's totally fair to criticize someone when they publicly state who they're going to vote for. I think it's perfectly valid, to give you reasons why you think they're wrong if you do. But there were definitely a lot of people going overboard. So I just hope that Kyle sincerely wants to vote for President Trump and thinks that he is a better option over Kamala Harris. Of course, Trump isn't perfect. I don't plan to vote for him because he's perfect. I plan to vote for him because he's better than the alternative. And you can think that that's a cynical way to think of politics, but that's the current state of politics, and honestly has been for several years. So I'm glad that in the end the situation was resolved and that Kyle is back on the Trump train, but it is unfortunate the way it came about. Okay, so if you did not know this, over the last few days, the stock market has seen a significant drop in stock prices, pretty much across the board. The S&P 500 right now is down about 8.5% from its most recent high. So that's considered correction territory. The Dow Jones and the Nasdaq Composite are also down right now. People are calling it the Kamala crash. To be honest, I don't think Kamala Harris is directly linked to this, but it is happening under the Biden administration, and presidents typically are blamed for economic downturns. This is coming off of a relatively weak jobs report coming out this past month for July. We saw a little less than 150,000 jobs added to the United States economy, and in the 2020s, that's a relatively low number. It's not catastrophically low. I think a lot of people are exaggerating it, but it does show signs of a slowing economy, and it could be a bit of a warning sign for a potential recession that we may be entering. If it is the case that we are entering a recession, that is going to have some significant effects on the 2024 race. Like I said, the administration that's in charge usually does badly when there's a recession. Historically, people like George H.W. Bush and actually George Bush, George H.W. lost his election when there was a recession in 1992, and obviously Republicans lost big in 2008 after a recession started under President George W. Bush. A more recent example that may or may not fit into the same category is the recession that happened as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the shutdowns under the Trump administration. We saw Joe Biden and the Democrats winning the presidency in both houses of Congress in 2020 after that recession. But the problem is that even if we are entering a recession, it is already very late in the presidential election cycle, so you won't see the effects as strongly, even if we are in a recession. But I will continue to keep you guys posted on what's going on in the economy, and that's all for now.